Hello and welcome to Elvenhome. After something of a gap which I hadn't really originally intended, but for the reasons that I will very shortly explain, a part of the layout has reached something of a crossroads and something needs to be done. So let's get straight into the video and let me tell you some of the issues that I'm having with a part of the layout. You'll recall from the last few videos that I've been musing about what to do down this end of the layout. And part of the main reason for the gap in the videos is that actually I got to a point where I wasn't quite sure, and I'm still not quite sure. So in this video, I'm going to break into two sections. The first section is going to just talk you through the things that are that I know need addressing at this end of the layout. Then we'll go on to a return of Two to Watch, which is going to become an occasional series. There's a couple of really very new channels that I want to bring to your attention. A proper running session with the locomotives that you can see running round, and there's a story attaching to Springbok, which is the locomotive nearest that's just passed through, which I'll explain a bit later in the video. Before we come back to the end, when I talk about what is in my mind to respond to the points that I'm going to pick up now, I thought it makes sense to break up the chat into two smaller sections. At this point, I'll pop up onto the screen an image of the original track plan. And what was originally intended for this end of the layout. The original plans had, in this area, all of this was intended to carry on at the same level originally, and a brewery was going to be here. And in fact, this here is intended to be the spur originally that would have taken it into the brewery. Coming under the bridge down there was a river, the Brandywine, which was going to come and flow under the viaduct, under something, because it wasn't originally intended to be a viaduct, into an area here which was going to be a port or a dock of some description. And if you go back and look at the earlier videos, you will see that all of this area originally came out to form what was going to be the dock, because the Brandywine flowed into the dock area and then flowed out to the sea. At some point, I didn't like that idea. It just didn't seem to work for me in terms of the layout at this bottom end of the layout. And in fact, when I stand and look at what I've built, I really like that whole area down to there. Obviously this gap around the coaling stage and what will be the entrance to the depot needs to be filled, but I've got in my mind how I'm going to do that, so I'm not too worried about that. The bit that's always caused me a bit of a uncertainty, I think, until I found the gasworks, and I'm happy with the gasworks. But then it always gave me a difficulty about, well, what comes under that bridge? Why is there a valley there? And of course, being a riverbed made sense. So that's always been a bit in my mind how I was going to put that right. The bigger problem was High Elven. That when High Elven changed from being a little chocolate boxy village with a church in it, and not much else, and just a little station for a train with an auto coach, which I'd always intended it to be, I gave myself problems about what else needed to be up there, as you know, and I've talked through. Well, as you can see, quite a lot has changed there. I'd hoped that I'd be able to cut the board back, leaving all the track and everything else in place. In fact, that proved just not to be possible for various reasons with the way of the construction. So the only solution was to strip. I had to strip the wiring off, or some of the wiring off from underneath, because some of it was attached to the bit of the board that's not there anymore. Sorry about that, but I was interrupted. In the end, the only answer was to strip it back completely. And I've put back, roughly in the places where they'd be, the buildings, just to give me an idea of what it would look like. I think I am quite happy with that as the area that will be up on the hill. I don't know whether I'm happy with what the track layout was there yet, so that's in my mind, but we'll come back to that. At this end of the layout, I have had, over recent months, a problem with the viaduct. The viaduct, I didn't realise when I built it, is only just wide enough. At least it's wide enough for the coaches, and it's wide enough for most of my locomotives. But the bigger locomotives on the outer track can occasionally, if the track has moved slightly, and I am talking slightly, millimetres, clip the wall. And so it takes very careful adjustment, because obviously if I bring the outer track in too far, then the coaches collide as it goes round the viaduct. The viaduct is also showing its age. The viaduct was the second scratch build that I ever did. And I'm pleased with it. I think it works well, and if I have to replace it, I will use a similar way of building it, except that I needed to have a stronger deck than the card that I used. And in places, there's a dip or two in there. And also, because I've used card, it would be very difficult to ballast that, because the moment you put any water on it, the card will all just go a bit strange. So that has been giving me a problem or two. Something else which I didn't realise, which was born, I think, of my inexperience, which is, if you look at the original plan of the layout, the curve of the track was meant to start back here. Because I filled in the space from here to here, it pushed the start of the curve back, which meant that the curve over here is tighter than I originally intended. It's still at least second radius, but it is tighter. The deck also sits higher than the track, than the thing that it's coming onto, which means there's a very slight uphill as it goes into the viaduct. And the train then traverses an S-curve, and quite a tight S-curve here. The combined effect of all of that is that some of my locomotives, the Castle in particular, struggle if they're pulling too many coaches. Now, I thought at first I'd introduced a quite significant incline, but I haven't. I've checked it with a spirit level, and the layout is pretty much flat, but it is slightly uphill and into transverse curves, and the load that that's putting on the locomotive for the ones with less pulling power means some of them struggle with too many coaches behind. So I've reached the point at which I really need to think hard about what do I put in this area, and does this bit of the layout require sort of all from here across to there a bit of redesign. And I hadn't got that clear in my mind until this week, really. So there was no point doing a video until this week, but I do have one or two ideas on which I would be interested in your views. So we'll come back at the end of the video, and I'll tell you what's sitting in my mind as to what I might be thinking of doing. So let's go on to two to watch, and two pretty new channels, one very new channel in particular, which I think would benefit from a few more people following them. Hello and welcome to Two to Watch. Two to Watch was a series that I created last year to showcase N-gauge layouts which I was enjoying watching, but which I thought would benefit from some wider exposure and more help and support from the fabulous community of subscribers and other modelers that make up the YouTube viewership. I stopped doing it because I'd reached the point where the channels that I had left to review were really not putting much new content up. And I didn't want to be recommending to you channels which were, for various reasons, people had not been able to carry on with their channel. And there's perfectly good reasons why people find themselves in that position. But in the intervening time, I've now come across two channels, both relatively new, which I think would benefit from some exposure and a few more subscribers to provide help and assistance and response to the modelers as they start out on their journey. The first of the channels is Lyng and District Model Railway, which I came across, trying to think, probably about 2 or 3 months ago. Steve is a retired teacher, and as he says himself, that during the winter months, when gardening, caravanning, fishing and outside activities can no longer take place, I am relegated to walking the dog, reading and general pottering about in the garage. So I've decided, with the encouragement of my family, who I think want me out from under their feet, to build a model railway from scratch in my reclaimed 11'6" by 6' shed. This is a video evidence of my journey to record what I accomplish and what issues I come across. He's put up so far about 27 videos. He puts stuff out reasonably regularly because he's building his layout at some pace. He obviously spends a lot of time doing it. And in that process, he's attempting successfully, as you'll see, quite a few techniques in terms of scenic work as he builds a multi-level layout based in the South Wales, from where, by the sound of his accent, he originally comes. I'm really enjoying watching him build the layout. It's always good to see a layout developing from scratch. And as the scenic work goes in, it's particularly good that you see that point at which track, and just basic track, turns into a real place that's starting to have form and shape. So I'm sure you'd enjoy going and joining his happy band of 22 subscribers and getting to follow the journey along with Steve as he builds his layout. The other channel, which is a very new channel indeed, and at the start of the week he only had 1 subscriber, which was me, but I see he's now got up to 10, is Ian's channel, Ian's Engage, in which he has returned to the hobby after a break of 35 years, and he's looking to build an Engage layout. He's only put 2 videos up so far, so you really are in on the ground floor if you want to follow this one. The most recent one talked about his long-term ambition for a layout, but also that can't be built just yet, and so in the short term he's going to build a shelf layout called Shelfington. And he was talking about the plans for that, and also that he's thinking about what kind of controller he might want to get. So those of you that have different forms of controller may well be able to provide advice to him on what he may want, both short term, I think, and longer term if he's going to build a bigger and more complex layout, which is going to have more trains running on them. As I said, this is a very new channel. But it's always great fun to watch a channel start up, and in particular to see a layout grow from the concept to design and then to the build. So those are the 2 channels for this week. The next 2 to watch, I probably will put one up about 4 to 6 weeks time. I'm not going to try to do them in every episode because I am keen to try and give you channels that are producing content currently. And I think I will probably veer towards channels which don't have many subscribers, because I know for me how much it helps as you start to get subscribers, people start to give you comments. They are just the most valuable thing in the world. So anything we can do to help others that are coming along to this great hobby seems to me a good thing to do. And with that, that concludes 2 to watch for this episode. Well, I hope you enjoyed the running session with the two B1s, both pulling Gresley stock, one in blood and custard or carmine and cream, and the other running as Gresley teaks. I mentioned earlier, there's a story about Springbok as it goes through the screen. I went to Model Rail Scotland. It was great to go back to a model railway exhibition. And part of the reason why I delayed the last video was in case there was anything from Model Rail Scotland that I thought I would want to include. On the Rails of Sheffield stand, there was Springbok, DCC fitted, second hand, £109. And I thought, oh wow, that looks rather nice. That looks nicer than I remembered. I think I'll get that. And I thought, no, just have a wander around, have a think. Which was fatal, of course, because when I came back to the Rails of Sheffield stand, there was the space where Springbok had been. And I thought, oh dear, I've missed my chance. Only to get home that night. And on eBay, there was Springbok, which I secured for £102, I think, and £4.50 postage, so £106.50. Now, it wasn't DCC fitted, but I've got plenty of chips around, so that didn't bother me any. And it looked, certainly as described, that it was from bankrupt stock and that it was virtually brand new. I don't think it had been run. I looked at the wheels. It certainly hadn't been run very much if it had been run. And it's a lovely locomotive. It has a Zimmo chip in it, so it's got the active braking. And the B1s do look good running around the layout. So that's my tale from Model Rail Scotland. I had explained to you the problems that I was encountering with the Viaduct and generally my thoughts around this sort of area. And I thought what I would do is bring you up to date where I'm thinking currently before I start doing anything, because I'm always interested in the views of subscribers to the channel, which have been incredibly helpful to me in all sorts of ways as I've thought about things. A couple of videos ago, in response to one of my comments generally then about High Elven, Chris from 4 Oak Street mentioned about a river coming down through here and extending the viaduct so it was longer. And I was really attracted to that idea. He wasn't to know, but actually sorting the viaduct out probably means rebuilding it, because some of the problems that it has, it's just too narrow, I think. And I do have some rather large locomotives on order, the 9F, for example, and the Britannia. They're probably not longer than the Duchess or the Coronation that I've got, but I just suspect that I'm going to increasingly have problems with any fairly lengthy locomotives that I get. And also it'll help me address the fact that I will need to do something. If I'm going to put any ballast on the viaduct, I've got to put a deck which will not just take all the water. And I can't ballast that viaduct. The card would just buckle and warp and it'd be a right mess. So, where I'm thinking at the moment is that I want to reintroduce the river coming down from under this bridge and running down through here somewhere to emerge over this side and then run off that way. I think I need to bring this curve to start back here as originally intended, which means this wall area probably needs to change. And I'm quite attracted to a longer viaduct, if I can build it, that might take the curve from here around to about here somewhere, which would then allow me to ease this curve a little, which I think would help. That probably means, in fact it almost certainly does mean, that if I'm going to have a river running through here, I need to raise the area here, not by much, but I don't think even using the Woodland Scenics water, I don't think it would look right if I just put a river in and there was no banks going down to it. And also, if you think that you've just built a gasworks there, you're not going to build a gasworks where the river is in the slightest bit of heavy rain and it's going to flood. So we've got to give some depth between the bank, which would be walled at this point because it's running through a town, and the top of the water. So I think that probably means that the gasworks has got to come out. None of that is stuck down apart from the fence. The road coming down to the viaduct will come out, and the scrapyard, and I will raise that all, probably, I would think, something like 10 millimeters, sort of half an inchish, that kind of thing, because that will allow me to have a bit of depth there, and then I can refigure the road, just rebuild that road slope, because the arches in the viaduct originally anticipated there being water coming through, so they're high enough to be able to lift that up by 10 millimeters and large lorries still pass through the centre. Remembering that this would have been built, of course, before tall lorries were a thing, and so it would certainly have been high enough for carriages, horse-drawn carriages, which is what would have originally gone underneath it, to go through. That, I think, means that will see quite potentially significant change. I've no difficulty about the gasworks being a bit higher. They certainly were built right in the middle of towns. No two ways about it. Just go and have a look at some of the maps from the 1860s or 70s. Plenty of gasworks, only supplied by road, producing gas, and right next to large areas of population. So its location and the fact that it's only road served is fine. And I think whether the road will come down there, that I'm not so sure about. The road originally from the plans descended at the far end, down where the wall is that runs by the school. So it originally came down here, but I don't want the road to go down that far anymore. So I'll have to think about how I bring the road down to come down under the viaduct. As for High Elven, I think I am going to stick with the layout there, but I'd be interested in views. And that now will be able to have the Rockface coming down through here. And I want to use a knock product to do the Rockface, which is a paper-based photographic paper. But it looks to provide a really interesting Rockface. When I come onto that, I'll show you it. I bought it a while ago, always intending to use it, and I'm still, I think, pretty determined to use that. And then something will go in here. What that something is, I'm not so sure, but we will find, I'll work that through. So those are the broad things that are sitting in my mind as I try and work my way through how I'm going to redesign this end of the layout. As I said, when I look at the rest of the layout, I just quickly pan, I'm really happy if I stand at the far end and look down. I'm really happy with how it looks until you get to about here. So all the stuff over here is the bit that's been swilling around in my mind. What do I do? So that would see possibly some quite significant change in this area from what I was originally going to do before I decided that High Elven really wasn't working. That's a lot of chat. So I'll be interested, obviously, in any comments and thoughts that you have about the sorts of things that are sitting in my mind. And it also means that the next scratch build is going to be the new viaduct. And there's lots I learned in building this viaduct, which I'll be able to put into operation in building its successor. With that pretty much concludes, I think, this edition of Elvenhome. Quite a lot to think about in all of that. So as I said, if you've got any comments, please do let me have them. If you like the video, please give it a thumbs up. That really helps. And if you're not already a subscriber, then please do subscribe. because it'd be great to have you along and for you to see the developments of this part of the layout as it's redesigned and built. So with that, until I speak to you again in about 2 weeks' time, by which time I will have decided what I'm going to be doing and hopefully made a start on the new viaduct, because the first thing with that is planning out what the deck needs to be, because then I can build the angles and things to work with it. So until I speak to you again in about a fortnight's time, that's goodbye from me. Bye bye.